Everybody?
Good.
Y'all asleep? Wait. If you didn't get to chapter 3, 4, and 5 philosophy, I have it here. You're welcome to come up and collect these hard copies. Chapter 3, 4, and 5. We are in chapter 3. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. And the last thing we did yesterday was make a list of Impressionism characteristics. The movement that we call Impressionism. And artists from the Impressionist period have been included in chapter 1. They will be included in many chapters of our text because it's a very important historical, innovative movement in the history of art. And the group of artists that were affiliated with this movement were rebels, and they were very dedicated to see change within their own lifetimes. The leader of the group, in many ways, is considered to be Claude Monet. And we're going to look at his work extensively, as well as Renoir and Edgar Degas and the wonderful Mary Cassatt and several others. But those are the major artists that were affiliated with this movement that preferred to go out of doors and do plein air painting, and to break the brushstroke, and to give a quick impression, and to paint ordinary people doing ordinary things. And this is where that word genre comes in, because we know that for hundreds of years, throughout the history of painting, for certain, that art was three things. Who remembers what those three things were? Yes?
Subject, form, and content.
No, well, that applies to art always, but the three genre for works of art, the three subject areas.
Oh, is it representational, abstract, and non-res?
Okay, no, those are categories.
Oh,
Okay, but the three
biblical.
subjects, the three major roles that
Are you-
for an artist.
Are you talking about the biblical?
Yes,
Portraiture and historical documentation.
right. This was it. The three topics, the three subjects that artists addressed for hundreds and hundreds of years were those three things. What is art? 1, 2, 3. Wrap it up in a box and put a pretty little bow on it, right? This is the movement that broke that up, okay? Blew it out of the water. And we know, we talked about yesterday, industrial revolution, scientific revolution, and how all of that, nothing happens in a vacuum. I mean, artists don't do what they do separate from what's going on in the world. You know, societal issues. Today, artists address all kind of issues. Political issues, societal issues, environmental issues, race issues. I mean, there are so many things that inspire an artist to do what they do. Where do they find their voice? Not when I'm talking about an artist, I'm not just talking about painters or visual artists. I'm talking about musicians. I'm talking about novelists, movie makers, right? I mean, it's all over the place. Sometimes it's fantasy. Sometimes it's nature. But really, still today, the idea of ordinary people doing ordinary things is a huge part of art making today. But it didn't happen by accident, and this is the group that opened the doors for creative freedom beyond those three narrow roles of the artist, okay? So we have a lot that we owe to this movement, because without the sacrifice of the Impressionist artists, somebody else would have had to do it later, right? Now, back to Claude Monet. As a young boy, he lived outside the city of Paris, and his father was a farmer, and he worked the fields, and he saw the painters that would come to the edge of the city along the riverbanks and set up their easels and address the landscape. And he was very enamored by this, and he announced to his father at the tender age of 12 that he was going to become a painter and move to Paris. And his father said, without a dime from me, you will do that. And he did. As a boy, he moved to Paris, pretty much penniless. He went to work as a caricature artist for one of the newspapers and publications, and he kind of supported himself in that manner. And so he struggled from the time he was a boy to fulfill his dream of becoming a painter. Later, when he submitted his works to the French Salon and was rejected year after year, he didn't change his ways. He didn't conform. He didn't look at their criteria and decide to alter what he really wanted to do. He stood fast. And a lot of people don't have what it takes to do that. They need to eat, right? They need acceptance. They need to have a career. And if you didn't bend to the constraints of the French Academy and the French Salon, too bad for you. Okay, now I'll get back into that topic later, but at the time, in the middle 1800s, if you went to Paris, it's not like it is today. There were not numerous galleries and museums all over the place for artists to show their art. Nada. There was one venue, and that was the French Salon, which was an extension of the Louvre, the French Academy. And that was it. If you didn't get in there, you were out. You had no opportunity to become a professional artist and show your art. Okay? It's hard for us to understand that, but that's how narrow it was. And the French Academy ruled with an iron fist. for hundreds and hundreds of years, since the time of Versailles, when King Louis established Paris as the arts center. He moved the capital from another location to Paris, and Paris in many ways is still the center of the art world. The big fabric houses are there, the big fashion designers are there, textiles. It is still very much a forerunner of anything that happens in the world of design of any kind. So, just to kind of paint the picture for you, these artists, and I'm using Monet as our poster artist, so to speak, for the Impressionist movement, again, faced a lot of privation, a lot of hardship. We had the Franco-Prussian War that lasted for a year, where the French were very much defeated, and Paris suffered greatly. People couldn't get food. If you lived in Paris during that 1 year period, and the French didn't win, and they suffered greatly. Monet lived through the Franco-Prussian War, and again was part of the public that suffered by, the embargoes that were placed on food and water getting into the city. If you're not a history person, again, it's all part of the fabric of the time. And then we had the Paris Revolution after that, and the insurrections that took place. So it was a kind of a dicey time. However, Monet stood fast and continued with his dream of painting freely subject matter of his choice, and using optical mixture, no blending, brush and line, and selecting leisure activities for art making. So these characteristics, the French salon was made up of a group of jurors, and this is still how artworks are accepted today or rejected today. Now, let me paint this picture for you. In Paris, we had the wonderful French Academy. What's an academy? Who can tell me?
Place to study.
It's a place to study, academic, right? The artists would go and put themselves under the tutelage of the master teachers at the French Academy. And it was very structured, very academic. They taught you what to paint, how to paint, the techniques to use, which at that time was illusionistic painting with layers and layers of glaze. We've seen art like that, right? And again, the subject matter was either historical figures, portraiture of very prominent people, or biblical illustration. That was it. You just couldn't go in there and do what you wanted to do at the French Academy. Out you would go. But for those that could endure and get their training academically, there was a competition on a biannual basis, and we're going to soon be looking at a painting by Jacques-Louis David that won this big competition that the Academy would put on, and it was kind of like who's the number one draft, right? Who's the greatest upcoming artist, right? And so it was quite the honor to win the Prix de Rome, is what it was called. And on a yearly basis, the French Academy would show the art of the students that were participating and in training, and it was called the French Salon. And so a group of jurors, which would be made up of teachers and artists, usually 10 or 12, all of the artists would submit works, call for entry, and the jury would decide, accepted or rejected. You're going to be included in the salon, which salon means showplace, okay? And it was held there at the Louvre. We're going to see some pictures later of all the paintings that are hung one atop another. That's called gallery or salon style hanging. And they would decide who would get in each year. Now, if the artist's work did not fit the criteria of what they thought was art, they weren't going to consider it. And Monet and some of his contemporaries would submit their works. They were not part of the Academy, but they would submit their works and be rejected year after year after year. So they had no niche. They had no foot in the door in terms of becoming prominent and accepted and successful, able to provide for themselves, for their families, etc. So sacrifice was part of the picture of these group of Impressionist artists. Claude Monet, his first wife, Camille, died from malnutrition about 5 years into their marriage. You know, got to be able to feed yourself and feed your family. So very difficult circumstances. Now, the tide was turning. The public and the French, let me ask you this. If you go through the French Revolution and you go through Napoleon, you go through the ups and downs of the French trying to get a democratic life for themselves, right? And having realized some success, do you think the artists, as part of that societal success, are going to continue to be held down by the constraints of this board? No, they're not. We don't think of artists as being, passive. Usually artists are the ones that are the most rebellious in terms of making change, right? So the public tide was turning. We'll unpackage that a little bit later, but by the time Claude Monet was in his 80s and 90s, the French government literally built a museum for him, okay? He endured, he started selling paintings because there was then alternative show places that were being even supported by the French government for the paintings that couldn't get into the salon. And we see alternative exhibitions. The Impressionist artists themselves started putting on their own shows. The Impressionist exhibits, there were 7 or 8 of them year after year, and the French, the Europeans, the wealthy Americans that would go to Europe and buy paintings, it all is about networking. Mary Cassatt, who was an American, prominent female individual. Her father was a very wealthy businessman from the East Coast, and Mary Cassatt had spent time in Paris being educated properly. She discovered Edgar Degas and really liked his work. She returned to the United States and announced to her family that she was going to move back to Paris and become a painter. And she, of course, had her own money and the support of her family. So she started introducing her wealthy friends, such as the Havemeyers and the Webbs and the Palmers of Chicago. And when they would come to Paris, she would direct them to who art was the avant-garde, who are the up-and-coming. How should you invest your purchasing? And that is the one major reason why American museums have such a huge collection of Impressionist art today, is because of that networking. Does everybody follow? Nothing happens in a vacuum, right? So we see Monet rising in his financial success, his artistic success. He purchased land outside of the city of Paris and was able to build a wonderful house. He dug a Japanese water garden. He hired gardeners. And today you can go there, and his studio, which has got a glass ceiling, is now a museum, Gévaudan, France. And in his 90s, he got this big idea. Now think about this. Normally, if we're in our 90s, we're happy that we can even get up and walk. But for a decade earlier, in his 80s, he would go out in the mornings, and he had this beautiful Japanese water garden with all the beautiful water lilies and the colors and the Japanese footbridge that covered it. He had gardeners that would go out before daylight, grab up the water lilies, shake them under the water, let them spring back up so that they would be nice and clean because there was a dirt road. And the major form of transportation was a horse and buggy. And Monet would become frustrated because the dirt would obscure the beautiful color of his water lilies. Can you imagine? So he had gained some significant wealth, because if you can hire gardeners to go out and dust your water lilies before you get in your little flat bottom boat and go sit in the middle of that pond every day and paint, that's what he did for years. 360. Well, he wanted the world to experience this world of beauty and color and light just like he had been able to do. So he built a studio with a glass ceiling, and he created the water lily murals, which are 24 feet in length, some of them 10 feet in height, so that the world could see the 360-degree panoramic view of his water lily pond. And the Orangerie, which is the museum that the French government built, is an oval-shaped room with an oval-shaped oculus, which is a skylight, basically. And all of those murals line the walls of that oval-spaced room. It's beautiful. So I'm sharing this little story with you because it took a lifetime for Monet, the leader of the Impressionists, to sacrifice, do without, starve, suffer, but be dedicated to his goal of creative freedom. And he endured. He gained success and notoriety within his own lifetime. And of course, he had a long lifetime to do that. So I share that with you because without that group of artists, we wouldn't have the creative license that we do today. Does everybody follow? So that's why Impressionism is really important for you to understand, because it changed everything. It opened a floodgate of what artists could do, what they could say, how they painted, when they painted, what they painted. All of that got just, it's like opening the floodgates, right? So we enjoy a lot of genre today because of that movement that occurred. Okay, now I've gone on and on and on, but I just trying to paint a picture for you as to how art, visual art, and of course, musical art. I mean, Claude Monet was very innovative. So was Claude Debussy, who was a musician. If you look at the art and you look at the music, a lot of the innovation is parallel across all the disciplines. If you're familiar with the great Clair de Lune, Claude Debussy, it's a beautiful musical piece. The way that Debussy would compose was so different and so innovative. It's very comparable to the way the Impressionist artists were painting. Now, let us now go to the next slide. And as promised, I want you now to make a list of what post-impressionism is. Now that we understand what impressionism was, and I'm going to be showing you a lot of different impressionist works later, so that you can have the visual information that you need. But just for building our list of facts right now, post-impressionist artists were a movement directly following these impressionists, and they were not reacting against. They were in support of what had come before them. Does that make sense? They further embraced the characteristics of color theory and color harmonies. As we listened about George Seurat yesterday, the great Chevreul, the scientist, the physicist, the color theorist, was mentioned, and his photograph was shown And we see how closely Seurat was listening to the theories of the scientists and applying them. So color theory and color harmony became even more important to these post-impressionist artists. They used complementary colors that were juxtaposed, which means they were next to each other, as we talked about yesterday. They employed the techniques of divisionism and pointillism. Divisionism and pointillism. Only difference between divisionism and pointillism is this. Divisionism is where the artist approaches the canvas and uses dots and does not allow any of the white canvas to show. Okay? Pointillism is the same use of dots of color, but with the white of the canvas also coming through by leaving some of the white of the canvas. That's it. That's the only difference. So it's called optical mixture because there is no mixing. Dot, 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 dot. The eye does the mixing, as we've seen. And the further away you are from an impressionist painting, the more realistic it looks. The closer up you get, the more you start to see these dots. Now, the post-impressionist artists, such as George Seurat, continued the benefit and the pursuit of a variety of different subjects, such as landscape and ordinary people doing ordinary things. And those two particular genres, even still life, those particular genre, we didn't mention that when we listed our Bible illustration and our portraiture and our historical documentation. If you did a great historical narrative painting of the captain and his unit, they might have been against a rocky landscape, but there was figures within the landscape that were significant. So landscape alone was not considered appropriate, right? So now we have, painters going out and just capturing the beauty of a landscape, and we widely today appreciate beautiful landscape paintings, but it was like almost pornography to the Academy at the time. And we cannot quite wrap our minds around that. They thought it was not significant for an artist to pursue alone, okay? So, just to kind of get your mind wrapped around the narrow view of the French salon, and then this widening of just appreciating a seascape or a landscape, okay? Did not compute for them. A woman ironing, the laundress, a woman and a child, women at tea, the ballerinas straightening their stockings before the performance, the jockeys before the race, women combing their hair, women bathing. None of that was grandiose, but that was the genre of these impressionists. The water lilies, right? The impressionist art movement, you could look at a work of art and know who painted it because of the subject matter, right? If it's water lilies, it was Claude Monet. If it was the jockeys before the race, it was Edgar Degas because he liked to go to the races. If it was the ballerinas, it was Edgar Degas because he loved the opera, he loved the ballet, and he loved horse racing, right? So we start to see for the first time a particular personal interest being demonstrated, right? We get to pick what we want to do. Mary Cassatt was a proper lady, and she didn't hang out at the cafes or the horse races. She spent time with her nieces and her sisters and women having tea time and mothers and their children. Those were the things that she captured in her life, right? So never before the middle 1800s could you look at a work of art and know who the artist was simply because of the genre, right? So, the post-impressionist artists continued with that freedom of genre, and they introduced what we call subjective color. Okay? Please write that down. What does subjective mean? Who can help me?
Your own opinion?
Yeah, the way I want to do it, right? You give a child a bunch of paint and colors, oil pastels, whatever. We have art camp going on right now. Okay? Don't be starting to tell them how to use color. They don't need you to do that. They are so free. Now, the younger children are more free. The older the kids get, they get a little inhibited. And we have to instruct more and say, go ahead, you know. But young children, hey, get out of their way. And they make the most beautiful, colorful paintings. The tree can be pink, the grass can be blue. It's what they want to do. Subjective, internal, okay? So one thing that the post-impressionist artists did is they pushed color to a subjective level. Everybody follow? Now, this is the world of Vincent van Gogh. Georges Seurat, Vincent van Gogh, Paul Gauguin. You've all heard about Van Gogh. He was part of the post-impressionists. His paintings were very subjective when it comes to color, right? Now, back to Claude Monet. No, the Impressionist artists still used local color. They were scientifically trying to record the great amount of color in open daylight, right? In a kind of a scientific, objective way. Post-impressionists took it further, okay? And the key artists, Seurat, Signac, Vincent van Gogh, and Paul Gauguin. Did everybody get this information? These are two huge periods in the history of art in relation to your being able to appreciate and understand what's going on in the art world today. I just say that to you. So that's why I've taken the time for you to get a grasp, let's just say. So 5 points if you can illuminate what Impressionism is. And likewise for Post-Impressionism. This is bonus points on your next test. Okay, so onward we go. We know that color is a phenomenon of light. And light passed through a prism, the rays bend and refract into different wavelengths of light. And we call that the visible spectrum. Visible spectrum, that's one of your vocabulary terms. And of course, a great amount of light will yield a great amount of color. A reduced amount of light, we have reduced intensity of color. As we study color, we can also talk once again about the element of value. Value, light and dark. Here we have a typical value scale. It's a 10 or 11 point scale. High key, mid key, low key. A high amount of light, a medium amount of light, a very low amount of light, right? So high, mid, and low key. Now you might think of that in terms of musical notation, but we're talking about color, or value, key, mid, high, mid, and low. This is how we can describe value in a work of art. And what's happening with the gray dot in the middle? As we go up and down the scale, who can tell me what's occurring? Yes?
It looks like it's getting, when you go up, it looks like it's getting a little lighter. As you go to the top, it gets a little darker. And then when you go in the middle, it's like you can't even see it. And it looks like it's doing the same thing, kind of like when it's going down too.
Okay. Y'all see? The reason we can't see it here is because of why?
It's the same color.
It's the same value.
Check value. Yeah.
And as we place that value in darker and darker and darker environments, it makes the circle look lighter, doesn't it? you would swear that white was being added to it.
Yeah.
It's called psychophysiological phenomenon, because it's not physically changing, it's how we perceive. So everything is relative based on the environment in which it's placed, right? So as the gray circle goes up into lighter environments, it appears darker, doesn't it? So the value gradation appears to change, not with the white, not with the black, but with the mid-tone value. Now, this is what artists study in design school. If you take a web design class, let's just say, where you have to create, very effective websites and things like that, or billboards, or anything visual. Painters study these kind of things. People who work with value and do drawing. You have to understand how environment is going to affect the gradations of value that are incorporated throughout the work. And so we know what is effective in terms of being able to see something quickly and clearly, close up or from a distance. So the concept of value relativity is important, okay? And this scale just represents that. High, mid, low key, and values do affect how we perceive change. Here we have Untitled, a drawing, a simple graphite drawing, not huge. This is rather intimate. It's about 8 by 8. Does it need a title? What's the subject?
Michael Jackson.
How do you know?
The hat, hair, glasses, and shirts.
Okay, because the iconic majorette jacket, whatever, and fedora hat, and the very famous, I guess those are Ray-Bans, I don't know. But the whole profile became very iconic, didn't it? It was just something else. So the artist didn't need to title it, kind of like Audra Flack's Marilyn, probably really didn't need a title because we still can recognize the iconic Marilyn Monroe. But look at how Mark had to draw the shapes accurately and then apply different values so that we would be able to recognize the icon, right? We studied at the end of chapter 2, logo and icon, didn't we? And it's all about shape, isn't it? And when we looked at those poster designs of Obama and Shea at the end, it's the simplification of the shape and the exactitude of the shape that help us recognize somebody's profile. So there's a lot of exactitude here. Mark Brandenburg had to be able to draw the profile and the contours that make up this jacket and the hat, and then all of the different details across the form so that we understand that it's three-dimensional, and blur your eyes, if you will, as you look at this drawing. I used to take the slide projector and just make it fuzzy, but if you kind of blur your eyes, I want you to think about high key, mid key, and low key. Do you see how they are distributed throughout this composition? The dark value, the dark, 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 the dark. You can't put dark value just in one place because your eye would get stuck there. It permeates throughout this composition. And then the mid-tone values, really, which occupy more space than anything. And then the high key, paper white. Mark Brandenburg had to reserve the white of the paper, because when you're drawing with graphite, you don't have white pencil. You leave the white of the paper where it needs to be. So this is a very nice drawing. It's very carefully executed, modeling, chiaroscuro, high, mid, low key value gradation. Please write the word gradation down. It'll save you a lot of extra words. One word. Gradation means a variety of values. So the reason we learn the art vocabulary is because it saves us breath. One word can say it all, right? High key, right? Saves you a big explanation. Mid key, low key, and then gradation means there's not just one, there's a variety of different values. So, beautiful. And so it relates very much to this value scale, if you think about it. Every single one of these values is represented in this drawing. Now, most of you will not remember what a negative is for a photograph. Anybody know? Back before digital photography.
It's what is it? Got two pictures, one has all the color and the negative has none of the color, correct?
Right, well, let me explain, since none of you probably have ever owned a Kodak camera or even a Canon that had film, okay? Hasn't been that long ago when our students wanted to photograph their art, they had to go buy film. Sometimes they would hire a photographer to come, take really professional, well-lit photographs of their art so they could build their portfolios. Then you have to take the film and send it off, wait for it to come back. You can pick it up at Walgreens, and you get the pictures, and you get the little brown strip of negatives, okay? Plastic celluloid, right? Then you could hold the negative up. And if you wanted to have your images printed again, you had to have those negatives. All right, this is how it was for years and years and years when film-based photography was still. It was the only way. It was the latest and greatest. Right now, everybody does digital photography. I know several photographers, friends, David Gill down at Gill's Photography and Frame Shop, and numerous others that had to make that transition between film-based photography and digital. They didn't invest, and they were holdouts for the old traditional method. That's fine, you can be a purist, but don't expect to keep your business going. They had to come up to new technologies, right? I can remember businesses that had to make a transition from using typewriters into computers, and there were numerous people in administrative levels that just retired because they didn't want to do it. Men and women that had worked their entire lifetimes and they just didn't want to learn something new. I can understand. This happened over the past 30 years, really. Maybe 50. But I just know this, when I came to Cameron 35 years ago, digital photography did not exist, okay? That is a brand new technology that we enjoy widely today, right? And then, of course, because of the computer and the internet, you can sit at your desk and send Walgreens your pictures to print digitally and then pick them up, right? There's all kinds of things that we benefit from. But in the day, the negative was everything. The reason I mention that is because Mark Brandenburg, and this is 2004, digital photography certainly was around in 2004, but Mark Brandenburg drew this as if it were a photographic negative. Y'all see that?
Wow, that's impressive.
Okay? It's got the reversal of value, as if you're looking at a negative of what would actually be printed. So if you didn't notice that, you have to know what a negative looks like. I'll share one little story with you. I don't know, a couple of years ago, I was out in my pasture. I don't know what I was doing, but it was hot. It was in July, I think, and the grass was not very green. I had already done, I don't know, maybe I was out there brush hogging, moving limbs or something. I'm walking across this grass that was kind of like shredded wheat when you walk on it. You know, when you walk in the grass and it crunches. It's hot and dry, right? and I see this shiny little something out, just like a little speck, like a needle in a haystack. And I don't like trash out in my pasture. I don't like Walmart bags, I don't like plastic, I don't like any of that stuff that gets blown in. I'm always picking it up. So I see this little reflective something. I said, that's some kind of piece of metal or plastic or something. I go over, I pick it up, and I'll be darned if it's not a little negative.
Oh.
I hold it up, and I'm thinking there's a man in it. And I'm thinking, I wonder who this is. Where did this come from? Is it somebody from around here? You know? I mean, it just, the whole historical thing hit me. I said, probably somebody was cleaning out, and then the wind came along and, you know, blew it out. I mean, it could have been from miles and miles away, but it was like this kind of little treasure I found, this little negative out, like, you know, a needle in a haystack, so to speak. Okay, onward we go. Ask yourself, is this easy to read? Somebody tell me which one is the easiest to read.
Either the black and white or the white on black. They're about the same.
Right, the high contrast. This is what we're most conditioned to. Right? Now, if you like the reversal, that's fine and good. But when you go to print that out, it's going to use a whole lot of ink. We don't see books printed like this, right? The negative space is white and the type is black and it's practical. And that goes all the way back to the history of printing. Because of digital today, we can reverse things and print it, but you're going to use up a whole lot of toner and a whole lot of ink, right? How about this?
Yeah.
It's a bit harder.
It's like a whisper, isn't it? Now, if you are a billboard designer, and you know, what does a billboard cost on a monthly basis? $1,000, $1,500, just depends on where it is, right?
Yeah.
And you got cars racing by. They only have so much time to get it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that top value contrast ain't gonna cut it. You've wasted your money because nobody's gonna be able to see it, right? So signage, people that do signage really have to understand value contrast and readability and effective website design. I've seen some great websites. I've seen some lousy websites. And really, readability and value contrast is very important. I think you'll agree. So this just kind of takes us back to the importance of value contrast. And that brings us to a very interesting image. And it's a work of art, and in the box by the picture, I'm going to ask you to write conceptual art. Conceptual art. And I'll turn the lights on here in a minute so that you can actually see to write. But it is a work to fully appreciate. We need to be able to see it at its full value contrast with the lights out. This is a work of art called a triptych. 3 parts, meant to be viewed as a whole. And the title, White Imitates Black. White Imitates Black. 2009 is what we call a lenticular print. It was showing at the Jack Shaman Gallery, and the artist is Hank Willis Thomas. And 1, 2, 3. It's a triptych. Try. And a lenticular print, you've all seen them. There is a surface that changes as your body changes and the light changes. And so here we have a fixed image where there is no changing, because the photographer who photographed this stood in the center and clicked and captured the way the triptych looked with a certain set of lighting conditions. And a lenticular print is meant to really to be viewed by live experience, and as you would walk past it, these gradations of values that kind of shimmer would change. Does everybody follow me? Okay, so that is a design decision made by Hank Willis Thomas. A lenticular print is not something that you can freeze unless you photograph, because as you are alive and moving, it's constantly changing, depending on the lighting and the positioning of you. And so you get this kind of arbitrary change that occurs. And even in this photograph that we have, we see a huge variety of value: high key, mid key, low key. Some things are very self-evident, like the first three letters of the word black. Probably the W and the H are the most high in value contrast here. And this all becomes very subtle here. Does everybody follow me? So we have clarity using these bold block letters. Hank Willis Thomas chose. He didn't want you to be confused. Usually block letters are very quick to understand and read. A lot of conceptual artists use phrases or words to communicate meaning in their art. And so here we have Hank Willis Thomas with his play on words. Notice, the title says white imitates black. But the text in each of these portions, white imitates white. White imitates black. Black imitates white. They all say something different than white imitates black. So we have multiple variations on the words. I'm sorry, this says black imitates black. So the only time we say white imitates black is down here in this title. Y'all follow me? So it's got to get your curiosity out a little bit. What is he, we can talk about the subject. What would we call the subject in a work of art like this? If we say that the subject, form, and content applies to all works of art, what would we say the subject is? The what? Yes?
Letters.
Okay, we just say words, letters. Yeah. Or, anybody else want to share what they think the subject is? I mean, you might take those letters and those words and process them through your brain and come up with something more than just letters.
Meaning.
Well, that gets to content, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay? So if we say the subject is, maybe the subject is value. The most extreme dark and the most extreme light. Or we could say the subject is, imitation. All of those would apply to the what. Would you agree? All right, the form. What would be involved as we talk about the how? How Hank Willis Thomas designed this? What's in the mix? Yes?
Value.
Value. He knew he was going to use the element of value and gradation of value. Okay?
So we can put value as a subject and value as a form.
Can be both.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Love can be a subject. Love can be a verb.
Oh.
Okay? All right? What else about the form? We've already talked about it. I had you write it down.
Conceptual art.
Triptych. He has designed this in a 3-part image. 1, 2, 3. And value is there, and gradation of value. It's all there for us. We could even say that the rectangles are vertically aligned. And visually, form means the total appearance. Notice the wall is white, the frames are white, the negative space is white. It's very sanitized, so that it will not take away from what?
The word.
Right. Now imagine these triptych frames being black. You see how it would steal the thunder
Yeah.
of the message? Another thing we said about the form was that surface, that lenticular surface. It's almost like a frosty glass, and as you move, the values change. If you've never seen a lenticular surface, you will at some point in your life. It's very commercial. Okay,
I have a question.
yes.
I don't know. To me, the last photo,
Mhm.
it doesn't look like it says white. It looks like it says another word. Like WHI. Looks like it's a C or a K.
Well, because of black.
Yeah, I see what you're talking about. Quick. Yeah, that's a
It's
little
like-
bit ambiguous, very uncertain, makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's because when you're taking a picture, you can't like recenter your head. You can't move around the picture in 3D space, so it didn't get it from exactly the right angle. But
Right, so
It
it's
would be hard to-
obscured, and it's a little ambiguous, it's a little uncertain, I've never noticed that before. Did I? Makes you think. Little uncertainty. Okay, content. Subject, form, content. Now, at the surface level, I want you to reserve your responses to me in terms of what this means to you, or the why. Why did Hank Willis Thomas create this? I want you to just reflect on that internally for a while, because we're gonna watch a little interview and learn more about Hank Willis Thomas, okay? It's worth it. And he's a contemporary artist, and very conceptual, very articulate. You'll enjoy listening to him speak. And then on the other side, we'll come back to the image, and then perhaps your initial thoughts about what this means and what it means to you may have been solidified or expanded. Does everybody follow? Sometimes, when we look at a work of art like this that's conceptual, we know that it's our own business when we face a work like this to use our brain. This is not an aesthetic work where we just can ooh and ah over Hank Willis's skill to record something like this. This has more of an aesthetic, sensual quality to it because we appreciate the skill that it took, all the beautiful shapes. You follow what I'm saying? This is more about beauty. You have more of a sensual response. This is more cerebral. This is more intellectual. I'm not going to gush all over this because, there's so much lovely modeling and chiaroscuro. It's just simple block letters. I am responding to it in a different manner. Do y'all understand what I'm saying? And you are too. And it demands a little more from me. As we looked at Brandenburg's work, this doesn't demand a whole lot from me. I recognize it. I appreciate it. I can relate to it. I have been alive during the time in the life of Michael Jackson, right? It's self-evident, correct? Now, if you are someone that doesn't know about Michael Jackson, you've got to do some research to figure out who he was and why he was such a big deal and still is today.
Who doesn't know about Michael Jackson?
Well, yeah, probably very few people don't know about him.
A lot of people in Europe.
No, he was iconic all over the world, I promise you.
Well, to the younger people, like
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe,
Yeah, they got guys like Bobby the Blog or something.
yeah. Okay, you opened the can of worms. I have to share this story. I'm a storyteller. Okay, my mother. I have two brothers. My mother's taught school. She worked hard. My father was in the oil business. He was gone a lot. Okay, my mother would teach. She would come home. She would go directly to the kitchen and start cooking dinner. Okay, work all day, come home, You don't just flop out and turn on the remote. My mother's in the kitchen, getting dinner ready, right? Serving us our dinner, making certain I'm practicing the piano. My older brother is down there playing the trumpet. I don't know what the younger one was doing at this time, but we had stuff we had to do before dinner, right? Then she would clear the table, and then my brothers would sit down at that kitchen table and she would oversee their homework. I had my own desk in my room, but I mean, she held court after dinner, okay? My brothers have her to thank for their success academically because, you know, back in that day, you took books home and you had homework, all right? Okay, so my mother might have lights out by 10 o'clock at night, okay? She didn't have a television in the kitchen, all right? All right, so get this. I think I am in, I think I was at the university, okay? Come home, People magazine had John Lennon on the cover, all right? Remember what happened to John Lennon? Okay? And I thought, I'm gonna ask my mother if she knows who this is. Because, I mean, with his little glasses and his profile, he is as iconic as Michael Jackson, right? So I said to my mom, I said, Mama, who's this? She didn't know. Of course, we thought that was so funny. But it makes sense. My mother didn't sit around and watch TV. You know, she had work to do. And she did not have the same kind of cultural literacy as certainly the younger generation or someone that grew up with the Beatles, right? And John Lennon's looks changed. I mean, she probably would have recognized the cover of People magazine if they had looked with their little Beatle haircut when they came out when I was in the 2nd grade. Because I had a Beatle wig and some Beatle boots for Christmas. Okay, that's how. Okay, so when I showed my mother that very iconic cover of People magazine of John Lennon's face, we just thought it was hilarious that she couldn't tell me who it was. And, you know, I said, Mother, you're culturally illiterate. And she, of course, went on to tell me exactly why. Because she was busy taking care of us, right? So when you say, how can anyone not know? Okay. All right, I'm off on a tangent, but I think you get it. Here we are responding to this work on a different level because it's more about the intellect and thinking, and it demands more from us because there are words involved. You follow what I'm saying? Okay, so bear with me a moment. We're going to learn a little bit more about this artist. And hang on, Alana, I have to change gears here and get my clip up. Hang on. Now, Hank Willis Thomas is very, very prolific. He's very highly successful in a contemporary conceptual world of art. And you can just Google him. And we're gonna, I never probably watched the same video or the same interview. I always find different ones, but let's see how many there are about Hank Willis Thomas. And I'm going to try to find an interview that we can enjoy and see other works beside this one work. Bear with me. We'll start off with this short clip. I think.
the sound off in the bottom right of the. Go move the mouse up.
It's on the video.
Yes, on the video.
Alright,
So go to the right all the way. The sound volume.
Keep going, right. One more.
Right.
There it is.
There you go. It's on.
I know, so why is the sound not coming on?
Oh, that's good.
Alright, hang on, we'll figure it out.
Willis Thomas, and this is how art changed me. I would say that the first conscious creative acts that I did were reorganizing photo albums when I was 5 or 6 years old at my grandmother's house, where I was re-correlating photo albums based off of my kind of rubric about who was related to who and what happened when. And so that was a form of curation and storytelling. As I've worked with photographs for as long as I can remember, and all my work is about framing in context, about how whoever is created the frame is actually making the reality that we know. That is something I learned through my mother's work as a photographer and a photo historian who looked at the legacy of Black photographers, which was a different framing than what mainstream photography told me about the world. I use art as a tool to learn about myself, to process and understand who I am, how I came to be, where I'm going. When I think about a specific work that changed me, they would be Question Bridge Black Males, which was a video-mediated megalog between African American men, where we had a question and answer exchange. The premise was that there's as much diversity within any demographic as there is outside of it. And so what we would do is we'd go to self-identified Black men and video record them asking questions of other self-identified Black men. We thought we would show one question to, 5 or 10 Black men and choose the best answer. But instead, we got 5 or 10 different answers. And each one had its own merit, it had its own value, and was unique. So the same person could respond to a very different question in a way that might be contradictory or surprising. And we realized through this process, almost 5 years of making, that it wasn't really about Black men. It was about people, what happens when people are put into groups, how they exist within the group, and also how they find agency outside of that while maintaining their own identity. In the process of making Question Bridge, the surprise that I constantly had was like an awakening, where I was challenged to reconsider who I am, what I know about the world, and how I navigate it. And as a self-identified Black man who does not believe in race, in part because of that, because I am my own person, and that race is a framing and a construct that has nothing to do with my internal life. It has everything to do with what I do with my external life. But inside me, I'm an infinite, beautiful human being. What I love about being an artist is that I feel like I get to be a form of a seer or a psychic, where I have something in my mind, and I'm like use all of this alchemy to bring something into being that no one else can see happening, and then it happens, and then I'm like, hey. But then after it leaves my realm, it's got its own life, and I don't see that.
Okay, now that was just a brief insight into Hank Willis Thomas, not the insight I'm looking for you to have, but just a little introduction. I'm looking for some more of his work. Let us retype this.
Skank Willis Thomas. Welcome to the virtual experience of my exhibition, All Things Being Equal, at the Cincinnati Art Museum. One of the most profound things about having a survey exhibition at this point in my career is I'm still trying to figure out what I'm doing. One of the things I've learned more recently is that in many ways, artists are psychic or prophetic, especially when we think about conceptual artists who are really trying to take an idea and make it real in the future so that people in the future will help bring new meaning to it and translate it across the world. The significance of the phrase, all things being equal, ... implies that the ability to achieve true balance will always be delicate. When we think about the search and the quest for liberty and justice for all and true equality in our country, the work will never be complete. I Am a Man is really paying homage to the kind of old guard of the civil rights movement who opened the door for so many of us to even begin to think about what true integration and true equality and opportunity in this country could look like in the 20th century. When my cousin Sangha was murdered in the year 2000, I obviously was in shock and deep mourning, and for years, my family couldn't afford to buy him a headstone. And I realized if you aren't rich and you aren't famous, the only evidence that you actually lived was through the people whose lives you had an impact on. And in a way, many of us are walking memorials because we carry the spirits of our loved ones who've passed. The Neon work, Remember Me, was really inspired directly from a postcard I found of a Black person who appeared to be a World War I veteran holding his rifle and wearing his Sunday's best, and said on the back of the postcard, "Remember me." And I think we do often forget about the legacy and the strength and the courage of rural African Americans in the early 20th century. Branded is a series of work which was part of my first major creative epiphany, which was the way in which advertising and popular culture really rely on prejudice as a means to sell products. That, especially in the context of marketing, African Americans who are so undervalued in our society, and especially African American men, are very easily and often utilized as a tool to sell products. And in many ways, they become products themselves. And I was really investigating what it means to be the descendant of slaves who are still frequently publicly commodified bodies. My mother, my grandmother, and many of the women in my family were quilters. My aunt Yvonne, so many others really had this deep, rich connection to using old materials to make something that they could pass on to younger generations, and thinking also about the messages that our garments can carry, and especially during the Underground Railroad, where many of the ways in which messages were sent to escaping slaves was through the clothes and often the blankets that were left outside of the houses, the safe houses. I wanted to make a connection between the symbolic escape that so few African Americans have when they become a professional athlete to the escape that so few people are psychic or prophetic.
All right, it is now.
No offense, but if you start
sorry.
in stocks, real estate, or
After
crypto and
class
passive income
time,
investments in today's
believe it or
economy,
not,
I'm sorry, but you got it wrong.
We will look at the rest of this video tomorrow. Hopefully it piqued your interest at the wide display of his conceptual art and his appropriation. There were some works of art in there that were inspired by previous works of art in the history of art, which we'll discuss tomorrow. So anyway, y'all have a great afternoon and we'll continue and perhaps you can do a little personal research between now and then. And look at some of Hank Willis Thomas's work, and we'll look at the rest of this interview tomorrow. Y'all have a great afternoon and, you'll have makeup tests. Yes, I'll see you in my office, here in just a little bit.
2, correct.
2 o'clock.
Am I able to come before or just at 2?
At 2.
Okay.
Come at 2, and it's the art building right behind the theater. And the art office is right there to the right as you walk in. Don't forget your Scantron. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
And some of the art, like the Michael Jackson drawing, could that be
It is representation.
Okay.
It's realism. Representation. It is what it is, right?
Yes, ma'am. You have a great day, okay, ma'am?
You too.
Thanks. Thank you.